10 years after you left power, what is your vision of the global evolution of the world? Are you optimistic or pessimistic about its future?
Well, thank you very much for your invitation. It's a pleasure for me to be here. We are experiencing a change of era. It is not a matter of being optimistic or pessimistic, but of being aware of the magnitude of the change that is taking place and that affects our political, economic, cultural, and social systems. As always in history, everything is a mix of opportunities and risk. My wish is that opportunities can be consolidated in terms of greater stability, prosperity, and security, although for the moment instability, disorder, and uncertainty will be the predominant norm.
What message would you convey today, and you know it very well, you know Europe very well, to a divided Europe with a difficult North-South dialogue about the budget, with countries like Hungary and Poland which don't want to be the hostages of the rule of law, with Great Britain which has Brexitized, if I could say so, and with a shaky Franco-German axis?
Really, there has not been a moment in European history that has not been dotted with difficulties. What is today the European Union is a great exception that we would do very well to preserve. The European Union continued to be a magnificent political and economic success. And with all of these flaws, it must be reformed and renewed. I personally think that the Brexit is a mistake, and I think that the position of some countries like Hungary and Poland is a response to the current risk of many liberal democracies.
Do you think don't you think it's high time that the 27 European countries understand maybe the necessity to build a real united Europe to face the political, economic, and military challenges ahead?
What I think is that we have to know what to be want. And this moment is a crucial, strategic moment in the world, and obviously in the European Union. And therefore, it's a priority countries, especially Germany, but also others, must clearly define their positions. We're living in times of the rise of nationalism, of the threat, serious threat of populism, serious problems for our liberal democracies. But what are we going to do strategically in relation to China, in relation to Russia, in relation to the new realities in the Middle East, with the threats that our liberal democracies must face? It is time for reflection, for political leaders, for decisions of political leaders. I think there should be time for lesser politicians. I believe reinforcing our system of values, our alliance, will be vital for us.
I would like to add up one question to just your answer. With the ongoing crisis, the COVID and social problems, do you fear that populism, you alluded to it, might gain more and more ground?
Yes. Populism is a serious threat. And the question is that the response of the liberal democracies to this threat of the populism, combining with the situation created for the virus and so on, is a very serious problem for a lot of countries.
Mr. Prime Minister, the relationship between Europe and US President Donald Trump has been terrible. How do you anticipate the upcoming one with new President Joe Biden?
Well, I sincerely believe that the European Union's relation with President Joe Biden will be more comfortable than with President Trump. It's not difficult. but more comfortable in political, economic, and security terms. But that does not mean they are easier. The problems will be similar. The American vision can be nuanced, but Europe needs to assume more responsibility if it wants to be more than a simple companion, rather than simply lose itself in this change of era. We, in my view, we Europeans must be proactive. For instance, promoting TTIP in terms of trade changes, relation in trade, change in energy, reform and recreate and reinvent the NATO, enlarge NATO, and to be capable to imagine the creation of a new alliance of democracies, not incompatible with NATO, but to extend and to enlarge the presence of the security, of the guarantee of freedoms from NATO, cooperation in pandemics, climate change. This is a lot of things, but we Europeans must be proactive in this new moment and the relation with the Biden administration.
Which is, according to you, the main threat for the Western world today? For Donald Trump, if I understood, it is China, Russia, and Iran. Would you agree with that?
The great threat is, for me, the relations between U.S. and China. And this relation must to prevail confrontation, over cooperation, and so on. But there are another challenges. The technological revolution, the new nationalism that we talked before, the new anti-establishment elements in liberal democracies, all the questions related with climate change, immigration. There are many things to take care in today's world. If we must to defend our position, and our position is the liberal order. We must defend the liberal order. And if they, China or others, challenge liberal order, our message must be clear. We cannot accept a revolutionary change in the liberal order. We cannot change that the furrow of the liberal order in the world, because the future of the world, in my view, must be based in the continuity of the liberal order.
Let me add up these questions. You alluded China, Iran, and all that. Are you worried about the new 25 years pact or partnership that Iran, China, and Russia signed for 25 years, at the economic and military level?
Yeah, in the economy or military level is a very serious concern in my view. But these three powers, especially China, of our dimension, we must to influence in the international order and change the international order. Iran is a revolutionary country that tried to export a revolution, that export terrorism, that is a threat not only for his neighbor, but always for the rest of the world. And Russia, our capacity to destabilization is very important now. No? All the question relating with the cyber intervention from Russia are very challenging for us. No? The addition of all this question is a consequence of the retreat. The decision to the U.S. to retreat of the world is a consequence of this situation, of this tendency to disorder, tendency to the chaos, and tendency to the uncertainty today. No? And this is clear that this combination will be decisive for us in the future to the decision of the U.S. and the evolution of this of the treatment of these challenges and problems.
According to you, Mr. Prime Minister, should both NATO, Europe, and United States work in a more coordinated way precisely to face these threats?
I have no doubt. I have no doubt. The strengthening of relations between the United States and Europe are basic for world order and for the maintenance and expansion of freedoms in the world. That is the key point of the Western world for the future. If we know how to do it, we will prevail. If not, we will go through serious, very serious difficulties. This is my personal view about this.
Should NATO, it's a straightforward question, should NATO get rid of Erdogan, who is a real troubleshooter?
Turkey has been always a very important strategic ally for NATO. And I believe that NATO must avoid any provocation that could lead it to break basic commitment with Turkey. A different thing is the pursuit of Erdogan's policies that affect and are directed more towards the authoritarian regime model than towards a secular, moderate and liberal regime. Erdogan has created a lot of problems with different countries. We must be very careful and act consequently, but we must try to preserve, without damage, this link, this important link between NATO and Turkey.
According to you, are Islamism, or radical Islam, as we call them, the main threat for the West and Europe in particular?
There is a double threat from radical Islamists who use terrorism, and on the other side, the cultural disarmament of Western societies. The second worries me much more than the first, because the first one can be fought if there is determination. And we're fighting, and we can win. We're living under risk, but we can win. But cultural disarmament, the renunciation of the values that form our way of life, is our great weakness. And recovering them is not the task of radicals. It is the task, in my view, of moderate liberals and reformists and conservatives, a very serious alliance of moderates and modernizers that occupy the center of the political ground in our countries.
Could we say, Mr. Prime Minister, as Samuel Huntington wrote it, we have come to the point of the clash of civilization and the remaking of the world order?
No, I think that clearly the world order must be reinvented. And there are three possibilities, only three possibilities. Withdrawal, which is unacceptable. Restoration, which is impossible. And reinvention, which is possible and desirable. It is the way to go, to reinvent, to reinvention. A strengthening alliance that allows us to recreate the strengths of the liberal world is the best direction we can follow for the future. We can put the example, for instance, to trying to recreate NATO. I proposed a few years ago this idea, the enlargement of NATO, and to create a new alliance of democracies, but it's very basic in the current world, in a moment that the retrenchment of the US is a reality, and the necessity of new allies is a very serious issue for us.
In the Middle East, Mr. Prime Minister, would you say that Iran is the threat number one? Don't you think that, like Kim Jong-un in North Korea, Iran will get the nuclear bomb, which will be his life insurance for the regime?
First of all, I believe that Abraham agreements are a good start point for peace. I have no doubt that Iran is a threat to everyone, not only because of its desire for a nuclear bomb, its development of ballistic missiles, its support for terrorists in different countries, its intervention in Yemen, Lebanon, Syria, and elsewhere. If not for his desire to control and condition the international liberal order that goes far beyond an attempt to ensure the survival of his regime. We must not forget that Iran's objective is to destabilize the international order and to replace it with another in which its influence is decisive and will use all possible methods to achieve this kind of goal.
But don't you think that former US President Barack Obama and Joe Biden have been very naive, gullible, to sign the nuclear deal with Iran in July 2015?
Yes. I think that in 2015, Iran deal was a bad deal. I explained this. And I said it then, and I repeat it now. It was simply a session to buy time, and it will end up affecting a nuclear Iran. Returning to a nuclear agreement will seem to me a serious mistake, as signing the agreement at the time. It's a very serious mistake. The reality in the Middle East has changed, and to back simply without any kind of condition to this kind of agreement will be a mistake if really happened.
Do you think that the recent normalization, you alluded to it, of relationship between Israel, Bahrain, and United Arab Emirates, without forgetting recently Morocco, is a good step towards peace in Middle East? Or do you think it's just a strategic move from the Gulf states because they would need Israel and United States military help in case of conflict with Iran?
Both. I believe that the normalization of the relation of the different countries, Emirates or Bahrain or others, with Israel goes in the right direction of peace. Only for the recognition of the existence of Israel, of its security, of its right to exist, is a good foundation of the path of the peace. That also coincides with the strategic interests of Israel and consequently with Europe in case of conflict with Iran. It would be a positive and non-negative element. This kind of alliance between some Muslim countries and Israel, and to enlarge this alliance, I will be this a very right path in seeking the peace and establish a more secure and a more prosperous situation in the Middle East.
With Donald Trump on leave, Israel has definitely lost a strong ally. With Joe Biden, Europe and the Arabic countries aligned on the new US president, we get the impression we are going to go back to square one. That is to say, the two-state solution with East Jerusalem as the capital of a Palestinian state. Might it be, according to you, a big bone of contention between Israel, the US, and the Arab world, and the Palestinians, of course?
I believe that the two-state solution in peace is still desirable, but it's no longer the linchpin of the new Middle East policy. The axis now is around Iran. And now the new relationship between some Arab countries and Israel and the US. For strategic reasons, it is very important. For the retrenchment of the US, for the necessity to reinforce security, for the necessity to live in more safe and secure for a lot of countries. But I believe that the intelligence maintenance of the new policies in the Middle East will be much more useful in this moment than attempt to turn back that will be, in my view, doomed to failure.
Before we conclude, Mr. Prime Minister, I would like to add up one or two more questions. Don't you think, when you look at the situation of the world, that the world governance is in danger today because there is a lack of communication, a lack of understanding, and that it's no good for the future? It's not of good omen for the future.
I think I am agree. There is a very clear example in the response to the crisis created for the virus. We are living a global crisis without any kind of global response. something in this moment, in the last moment, with the terms of the vaccines is positive, but the rest is the result of the lack of coordination, lack of cooperation in the countries, a lack of leadership. And this is one of the key questions in the strategical order in the future, no? That we need a very clear leadership, and we need a leadership with a very strong allies. If we reinforce our values, reinforce and recreate our alliance, we can keep in the world in terms of prosperity, in terms of security, very well. But we have living in a world in which the liberal order, our system, our democratic system, our way of life, is clearly under threat.